What's up, y'all? My name is JR, and for those of you who don't already know, I'm a huge movie and TV nerd. If you're new here, I appreciate you taking the time to check out my channel. I hope you'll consider sticking around and joining the film community I'm trying to build here on YouTube. So in today's video, I'm going to be giving a recap, breakdown, analysis, reaction, and review of the first episode in Season 3 of the Showtime thriller drama series, Yellowjackets. And just so you guys know, this video will contain spoilers, so if you haven't gotten around to watching this episode yet and you don't want to know anything that happens in it, you might want to exit this video now. And with that being said, no more wasting time. Let's get into it. Yellowjackets to this point has been a bit of a mixed bag. It's just compelling enough to keep watching, even though the show has tried to play mind games with the audience in ways that I think have diminished its narrative value. Starting the pilot episode with one of the girls being hunted down in the past and ultimately killed, and then skipping forward just enough to let us see her being bled out, cut up, cooked, and eaten, only to put off who it was or why it happened for almost 2 full seasons, was simply put clickbaity in my opinion. Now, from there, the issues with the show's narrative structure are made apparent in that the most compelling part of the story was the girls trying to survive the wilderness, but that part of the story gets chopped up and fed to us in doses so small that they really don't do much in the way of making us care about the women who survived in the present. And speaking of those who survived the wilderness, it's been 2 full seasons and we still don't have a complete list of survivors. Season 1 featured Shauna, Misty, Taissa, Natalie, and Travis briefly. And we do learn fairly early on that Jackie died, but we have to wait until the end of the season to find out how. And it wasn't what I was expecting given how the story was set up, which I didn't really have a problem with. In fact, I actually thought it was a clever sleight of hand on behalf of the writers there. But then in Season 2, we find out that Van and Lottie also survived the wilderness. So one has to wonder if the writers are going to pull another rabbit or rabbits out of their hats in Season 3 just to make up for the fact that they've told this story out of order. Now, the writers also came up with a really shitty why in this one. And I always tell you guys that the why is maybe the biggest determining factor in whether a show or movie will be looked upon as being good or not. Now, we know the girls survived by way of cannibalism, but we don't find out how that came to pass until late in Season 2, 18 episodes in fact, which I thought was far too deep into the narrative. And though they decided in a fit of hunger to eat Jackie after she froze to death over a stupid argument considering the circumstances, the prevailing decision to eat the dead started because Lottie volunteered to let Shauna beat her within an inch of her life after losing her baby. And then because the group didn't have access to food and she wasn't healing, they thought she might die. And so she told Misty, who was caring for her at the time, that if she died, she didn't want her body to go to waste. But the group decided that Lottie was just too important. So they would draw cards to see who would sacrifice themselves in her stead. And I have to say that's maybe the dumbest, most unrealistic way to become a cannibal I've ever heard of. Now, I can understand deciding to eat people who have died by the wilderness in order to stave off hunger. I can even understand some members of the group killing other members because of disagreements and such. But saying to yourself, yeah, I'll volunteer my life to save the life of another person who is, in the grand scheme of things, no more important here than anybody else is stupid. And it goes to show that this story wasn't very well thought out, because I could have come up with a much better why than that. Anyway, I'm approaching Season 3 of the show with a healthy bit of skepticism, but secretly I'm hoping that the writers can come up with a way to save the show, because I thought the premise had potential, and that's why I started watching the television show in the first place. Now, episode 1 of Season 3 of Yellowjackets, entitled It Girl, starts with Mari being chased through the woods. Then, out of nowhere, Shauna jumps on her, wrestling her to the ground as she tries to pry something from her hand, eventually biting it, causing Mari to yell out. The other girls come running and separate the pair. Now, Mari complains about Shauna biting her, and Natalie explains, "You know the rules, Mari. You get tagged, you give it up." Now, Mari opens her hands and smiles as she replies, "I don't have it," to everyone's surprise. Now, at that point, they all look around, until they finally see Misty in the distance. Now she takes off running and the other girls give chase. Shauna eventually runs Misty down, but she tosses the bone to Jen, who catches it and steps inside of the safe zone in celebration. Now she's joined by the rest of her team as Mari walks by Shauna remarking, "Psych, I was just a decoy, bitch." And she holds up the L sign against her forehead with her left hand instead of the right hand. And Shauna remarks, "That's backwards, moron." Mari then joins the rest of the winning team as they celebrate together, right? Buzz, buzz, buzz. Roll opening credits. Now, this is the start, or restart, if you will, of what I am calling the series runner, right? That being the story that kind of goes on and on and on and on and on, right? Where the story is going to kind of pay dividends at a later time, not necessarily within the confines of this episode, not even necessarily within the confines of this season. That being the macro story, again, like I said, consistent of the girls' times in the wilderness. Now, don't be fooled by the fact that the show starts with this. It's definitely the macro story, because it's not likely to reach its conclusion until the series finale. My opinion, if you're expecting these girls to be rescued before the penultimate episode of the final season, that being from what I'm hearing, season 5, I think you're going to be sorely disappointed. And this particular part of the runner is just your good old-fashioned fake out from a micro sense, right? We get a girl being chased through the woods, this time for leisure instead of in a life or death type situation, this time in summer instead of in winter, like we saw in the pilot episode, for example. And here, we also see that Shauna has become more aggressive. Keep that in mind. Now, from there, we go back to the past and we see that the girls have managed to survive the winter without the cabin. And as the wooded area has turned to summer, they've constructed shelter in the form of a little stick hut village, an apartment complex of sorts, right? We see that they have a little garden, that they're raising rabbits and ducks that will no doubt be used for food, by the time it's all said and done. I mean, these girls are not stupid, right? Then we see 3 graves, which are no doubt Jackie, Javi, and Shauna's baby. So that makes it clear that no one else has died or been eaten since Javi was last season. Now, Jen, someone who's kind of getting, elevated screen time in this episode, shows up with a rifle and a dead bird in hand. So that means the group is back to successfully hunting game, again, mostly because the animals have returned now that winter's over. We see Thaisa lovingly combing Van's hair, kissing her on the forehead. So they're fully out and in love in front of everybody else at this point instead of hiding behind the bushes late at night. We see some of the random Yellowjackets playing a game of telephone with Travis. And frankly, I'm surprised there's not a line to his hut by now because he's the only dude at camp now. But then, Misty blows a makeshift horn and everybody stops what they're doing and they move over to one side of the apartment complex. Now, but on the way, Mari walks past Shauna and remarks, "Losers say what?" Shauna then replies, "How's your hand?" Mari shoots Shauna the bird as she continues on her way. And Jackie looks over the whole situation. And as Shauna walks away, Natalie asks, "Aren't you coming?" Shauna then replies, "I'm good." Natalie continues, "It's just that Van's been working so hard." Shauna replies, "Are you asking me if I want to come or telling me I have to?" Natalie replies, "You don't have to do anything, Shauna. I was just checking in." Shauna replies, "Well, I deeply appreciate it, my queen," Khaleesi, right? And she gives a half-assed curtsy before continuing on to her hut. Now, on the other side of the yard, we see Van standing before the rest of the group wearing a makeshift costume of sorts as she welcomes them to what they're calling a summer solstice festival. So she then goes on to congratulate the winning team of Capture the Bone, a team she was a part of, by the way, and remarks that she hopes that the losing team enjoys being their servants for the rest of the day. Now keep that in mind, the losing team had to serve the winning team. She then goes on to tell them a story of a group of courageous young women who would have won nationals without giving up a single goal, but that they were robbed of the chance to compete by the cruel hand of fate and that they rose to the challenge that the wilderness presented. Now, meanwhile, Shauna sits in her hut writing in her journal and she doesn't want to hear some bullshit story about their adventure in the woods, right? She laments the fact that her best friend, Jackie, is dead, that her baby is also dead, that she had to put his corpse out in the cold while everybody else talked about sacrifices and miracles. Now, back at the festival, with everybody else, Van explains that with their sacrifice came miracles. That they survived hunger, blizzards, and the shit bucket. Yeah, that bucket is some wild stuff, huh? She then asked if they could survive an unthinkable attack by a homicidal monster masquerading as a hot, if you're into that kind of thing, high school soccer coach. Keep that in mind. Before answering, you bet your ass they could. She then points at Natalie and continues, now, thanks to their unlikely new leader, they worked for 12 days and nights to feed the fire that destroyed their home, and seeing their courage and their faith, the wilderness then provided the greatest miracle yet. Spring came, and with it, a new beginning. Also keep that in mind. Now, meanwhile, back inside Shauna's hut, she continues writing, how's this story for you? Once upon a time, a group of teenagers got stranded in the wilderness and then went completely fucking nuts. I mean, hey, look, that's the log line for real of this show. Now, back at the festival, Van explains that, thanks to Nat's training, that Jen provided them with game to eat, and that thanks to Thaisa, they were able to build shelters. Shauna, inside her hut, continues writing that the girls worshipped evil spirits and that they hunted their friends and feasted on their flesh, and they fucking liked it, and that they told themselves stupid fairy tales that they were brave and strong. Now, back at the festival, Van continues, they were a team, and that they never gave up hope that their story does not end here. And then the ladies who are sitting there listening all applaud. Meanwhile, in Shauna's hut, she continues writing that the reality was that even if they were rescued, that they could never go home again because of what they'd done, because of what they had become. That was the truth, and that hearing anything else made her want to fucking insert open-ended verb, cut to black. Now, this long intercut scene or scenes is not only the setup, again, for the continuation of the run of this season, it's essentially an elaborate data dump, right? We learn a lot in this sequence. We learn that the girls fed the fire that burned their cabin down, which is likely how they kept from freezing to death. I mean, the fire would have been big enough to keep them warm if they just kind of stuck around nearby. And that they only had to do it for 12 days or so before spring showed up, right? Now, we also learned that they convinced themselves that this happened because they believed in forest fairy spirit magic, and not because the cabin just so happened to burn down just before spring. We also see that no one else has died since Javi, through the part of the series of shots where we see the 3 graves of those they've lost since the original crash site, right? And finally, we see that Shauna is the one person that has chosen not to glorify their time in the woods by turning it into some fractured fairy tale. And this puts Shauna on the outside of the group. And it seems like she's the only one, but keep that in mind for a later video at a later date, right? So from there, we finally get to the present, and we see Callie smoking the devil's lettuce in her room, blowing the smoke out the window so she don't get caught, I suppose, right? She gets a phone call before throwing the remainder of the joint out the window with no regard for fire safety, and then scurrying to get dressed. Now, adult Shauna knocks on the door before barging in, remarking to Callie that she's running late for school. Now, Callie responds with a quip before Shauna explains that she made oatmeal for breakfast. Now, Callie explains that she hates oatmeal, but Shauna explains that she thinks that they should eat more of it, to which Callie responds with another smart remark. Now, Shauna sits on Callie's bed and explains that it's the day of Natalie's funeral. Callie offers her condolences. Shauna continues to explain that Natalie has already been cremated, but that the service is today. Callie, clearly uncomfortable, explains that she has to go. Shauna reminds Callie that she left the dinner dishes in the sink the night before, and Callie explains that she had a ton of homework. Shauna then responds by asking how hard it is for her to just do the dishes, that all she has to do is rinse them off and put them in the dishwasher. And then Callie asks, really? With everything going on, you're really worried about the dishes? Shauna then appears to smell the weed smoke and asks Callie if she's been smoking chronic. Yeah, that's so 1990, right? Now, Callie makes fun of Shauna, her mom, and explains, and her mom explains that she regrets using the word, claiming that it's a word that her husband uses, Jeff. Callie explains that she doesn't know what her mom is talking about and that she's late for school, and then she exits the room. Now, this scene is the beginning of the episode's first A story, right? Which is going to be Callie's story, which is her trying to deal with the trauma she's experienced after shooting someone, Lottie, and then watching someone else, Natalie, her mother's childhood friend. Well, Lottie's her mother's childhood friend too, but die right in front of her, right? Now, this show tends to function more like a show that features several A stories, right? And that being that the A stories all kind of have a similar weight to them. They occupy a similar space in the episode, and that's why I'm not going with like A, B, C stories. They're all kind of A stories with smaller side stories that exist within the episode, mostly stories that kind of find their way to their end before the episode is over, and mostly in the past timeline as a part of the show's runner. Now, keep in mind, guys, that script structure is beginning to become more and more subjective as screenwriters kind of start to ditch the rules more and more in favor of non-traditional storytelling methods. I always tell you guys, as a screenwriter, you can literally do whatever you want, creatively speaking. But I do think it's important to learn the rules, though. That way you can understand which ones can be bent and which ones can be broken. There's a difference between going, I creatively decided to step outside of this box and do something a little bit different, and having someone read your script and go, okay, this person clearly doesn't know what they're doing. But that's just my 2 cents. I don't want to get too far in the weeds about the art of screenwriting here. Anyway, here in this series, in a micro sense, the writers are simply trying to establish or reestablish in this scene Callie and her mother's relationship after everything that happened at the end of season 2, right? We see Callie is trying her best to deal with the trauma that she's experienced after shooting Lottie to protect her mom and seeing Natalie die by smoking on that cron. You feel me? Which, look, I mean, she was likely already doing. As we've already seen in past seasons, that Callie is far from a saint. I mean, I think when her mom caught her at that party, she was on that Molly. So, I mean, Callie being a drug user, this ain't all because of trauma. This is just because Callie liked to get it in. You feel me? But it's clear this scene was the resetting of the board where these two characters specifically are concerned. And, narratively speaking, we're right back to where we started in season 1 with there being, high tension between the pair. Now, from there, we find Misty in bed listening to a meditation recording of some kind on her phone in her headphones. And my man Walter enters the bedroom and tells her that there was an alert on the meetings over murder board explaining that he knows she doesn't go on there anymore because of creative differences with some guy named Eric. But he explains that the last one that was on the board was a tasty one, I guess. He then asks her what time she wants to leave for Natalie's memorial, reminding her that funerals and memorials are time-honored grieving technologies. Now, Misty responds simply, "Are we done here?" Walter replies, "Yes, of course, I'm sorry," before he turns to leave the room. But before he does, he places a key on Misty's dresser. Now, Misty, seeing the key and being the nosy you-know-what that she is, asks what that is. Walter replies, "Huh? Oh, that. I wasn't even sure I should tell you about it. It's just, with Natalie's Myers-Briggs type and her lifelong nomadic tendencies, I figured there was a high probability of her keeping a storage unit in the area. I did some digging, and that's the key. Somebody should probably make sure there isn't anything incriminating in there, or sentimental, I guess. I'm happy to handle it if you're not up to it." Misty thinks for a second before explaining that she'll take care of it. Walter replies, "Okay," and then he leaves the room with a kind of creepy smile on his face, right? And this scene is the start of the show's second A story, that being Misty dealing with the trauma of killing her best friend. And simply put, Misty grieving the fact that Natalie is dead, and again, like I said, being the reason. Now, in a micro sense, this is the writers moving the story forward towards Natalie's funeral, which is going to be the focus of this episode, in the present at least. And I would say overall in the episode, right? This is also pushing Misty, and by proximity, Walter's season arcs forward, right? Now, Walter is trying to pull Misty out of her funk by way of manipulation. He wants to give her something to do in order to get her out of bed, and he leaves the room smiling because ultimately he gets her to take the bait, right? Not by agreeing to go to Natalie's funeral, but by at least agreeing to clean out Natalie's storage unit, right? Get her out the house. So next we go to the church and we see Shauna, Taissa, Van, and Jeff there, with a few other people kind of scattered about the pews, right? Now, Natalie's mother, old and feeble, using a walker and being on oxygen, struggles to stand before the group, but she does. And she explains, Natalie liked the swings. I had to push her until it got dark. She'd throw a fit if I didn't, so I pushed her. I'm her mother. Anyway, it's over now. And then she says, okay, that's it. And just like that, the service ends, right? The briefness of the ceremony, with 2 whole scenes of build-up, was a little funny. Ironically so, right? But I think the scene also spoke to how little Natalie's mother actually valued their friendship past Natalie's childhood, which we saw a bit in previous seasons, both through flashbacks and then when Natalie came home to get the mixtape for Kevin back in season 1. It also speaks to the fact that Natalie's mother may feel relieved that her daughter is finally gone and she doesn't have to concern herself with her probably shenanigans in her mind anymore. I don't personally include this as part of any of the episode's A stories, as it doesn't directly pertain to any of them. It more serves as a means of progressing the episode's plot, logically. Now, from there, we see Shauna, Van, Taissa, at a bar having a drink in Natalie's honor. Now, Shauna laments the fact that Natalie is gone. Now, Taissa mentions that Natalie's life was a horror show before Shauna remarks that it's a miracle she survived before they survived. Van replies, you can just say, ate each other. I mean, Nat was never one for bullshit. I think she would appreciate us going right at it. and look, Van ain't got no time for the nonsense. Van, like, I'm sick. I'm on my way up out of here. Like, no, we just gonna get right to it. Now, at that point, Shauna thinks before asking what any of it means. She remarks, Nat's life, our life. If you're lucky, it's smoke and mirrors. You don't even remember half of it. Taissa remarks to Shauna, you're a laugh riot today, aren't you? Shauna then asks, if I died tomorrow, what would people say about me? Van remarks that they'd lie and say nice things. Shauna asks what normal people would say, retorting, here lies Shauna Sadecki. Besides whatever the hell she did out there, she was the worst wife and mother on the planet. She's survived by a messed up daughter and a husband who blossomed after her death. Taissa chimes in, here lies Taissa Turner, the first state senator to impeach herself before taking office. Van tells them both to knock it off, explaining that no one's dying tomorrow and that they have time to workshop their eulogies before they all reconvene in hell. Damn, boy, Van is fire and brimstone, boy. And she's so close to death to be talking like that. But I mean, hey, I guess I respect it, right? Now, Taissa then asks where Misty is. Van asked Taissa if she told Misty about the funeral, citing that she promised that she would. Taissa explains that Lottie isn't there either, but Van remarks that that's because Lottie's in a facility for the differently sane. Shauna explains that it's fine, that Misty, with all her citizen detective skills and persona, could have found out about the funeral on her own, that she's probably bugged their table and is listening to their conversation, and they all laugh. I mean, listen, Misty does Misty things, bro. At that moment, Shauna appears to see something or someone, and I want you to keep that in mind. Now, she stares at a spot near the bar before Taissa asks if she's good. Van asks, what is it? Shauna snaps out of her trance and replies, oh, nothing. She then taps the salt shaker and asks, Quigley, are you there? Or are you making love to your parrot? The girls all laugh before Van remarks that those two things aren't mutually exclusive. Shauna then continues, you go, Misty. Now, the most important thing that happens here is that it appears that Shauna sees someone at the bar. The rest of the scene is simply the characters mourning the loss of Natalie and playfully denigrating Misty and Lottie. I mean, I'm fine with it. Like friends do this, right? There's always a friendship totem pole, right? And you're going to give some of your friends a little more than you give others, right? And we already know that Misty does, in fact, know about Natalie's funeral, but she has chosen not to be there, likely because of the guilt she feels, again, for having been the cause of her death. And this scene is logically the next scene as the episode plot progresses. So next we see Misty arrive at Natalie's storage unit to clean it out. Now she carefully sorts through all the items and keepsakes, placing them in different piles, some to keep and some to throw away, before finally happening upon Natalie's leather jacket And she holds it up and she smells it, and that seems to make her think. And again, this scene is the next beat, story beat number 2 in Misty's A story. Again, like I said, dealing with having killed her best friend, or at least the person she calls her best friend, Natalie, right? Now, from there, we go back to the past and we see Shauna preparing food for the winning Capture the Bone team, and she enlists Melissa to help her with this task. Now, Melissa drops a cut of meat on the ground, and Mari, who's laying out nearby with another winning member, remarks, "Watch it, that's our dinner." She then snaps her fingers and asks one of them to bottle them some berry wine. Melissa goes to do it before Shauna stops her and tells her not to. She then remarks, "I can't believe we didn't eat that bitch first." Yikes. To Melissa's shock. After a few uncomfortable moments, Melissa remarks, "Mari's so dumb I heard she chipped her tooth on her vibrator." Shauna, surprised, replies, "Wait, do you actually have a personality?" And that's kind of funny because, Melissa didn't say shit previously in previous seasons. So it's kind of like a funny quip, like in reality as well as within the world of the show, right? Because I assume that Melissa's probably like a member that hasn't been on the team for quite so long, maybe even a JV member, that made the trip with them to nationals. Now, at that point, Akilah brings Shauna a crown made of plants, asking her to try it on. That Lottie asked her to make Shauna something special for the ceremony later. When Shauna asks why, Akilah replies, "Because you're his mother." Shauna explains that she's not wearing it. Akilah then asks, "Are you sure? Because I really think it'll make you feel better." And as she tries to place the crown on Shauna's head against her wishes, Shauna throws it to the ground, remarking, "Get the F off me." At that point, Melissa walks by, stepping on the crown before interjection, "Oops, my bad," and then walking away. Akilah then picks up the destroyed crown and walks away as Shauna gets back to preparing dinner for the group. Meanwhile, inside one of the nearby huts, Natalie, Van, Taissa, and Jen meet. Now, Misty approaches the tent asking if the group is meeting now and if they want her to take minutes. Van replies simply, "Nope." Natalie interjects, "Thanks, Misty, but we're good. You were the MVP today. You should just relax and enjoy it." Misty smiles and simply replies, "Okay," and walks away as Van continues to patronize her, to Taissa's dismay. Now, at that point, Natalie asks Jen how the hunting's going. Jen explains that it's going good, that the deer are running like crazy in the North Valley. Taissa asks if she's seen anything while she's been out there. Van interjects asking, like murderous pyro tracks? Natalie immediately interrupts, "Stop, you guys, we talked about this. There's no way that he's alive." Van disagrees, but Nat continues, "I've scouted every inch of this place for miles and there's no sign of him. Either he starved or he froze to death. I'm telling you, Coach is dead." So here in this sequence, we see that Shauna is still angry about losing her baby. The same baby she tried to get rid of, mind you, herself, in order to hide the fact that she was sleeping with Jeff behind Jackie's back. But after Jackie died, I can understand Shauna feeling different about the baby. And also, after she actually pushed it out, I understand how feelings could change at that point as well, right? Especially given the circumstances, right? Everything looking so bleak, a baby kind of would have been like something to kind of, look forward to, but still trying to keep a baby alive in circumstances like that would have been difficult. But Shauna's coming undone, right? She's almost becoming feral in a way that's understandable, but again, she's ostracizing herself from the group by behaving the way that she is, right? I also want you guys to pay special attention to the fact that we are formally introduced to Melissa in this episode, right? And that's not an accident. So I want you to keep that in mind. Now, as for Natalie, it's interesting to see her in charge of the group because I would argue that she's not the best person for the job, considering that she would be expected to control all of the personalities that make up the group, right? I think Taissa would have been a much better choice at this point because Taissa can be forceful and she kind of has a shrewd political mind, right? And that's what I think would be necessary, out here because, you're really on your own with no, anything that goes down, there's no backup coming, right? But everybody seems to want to put hands on Coach Scott, right? And I can understand the impulse given that they assume he tried to murder them all. But Natalie is going to great lengths to convince the girls that Coach is dead, which, given their brief conversation after Javi's death last season, is likely to be untrue. And next, we actually get to see Coach Scott. You mention him and he shows up, right? In the flesh, right? Crip walking around the woods, checking animal traps that he's managed to set with no positive results to be found, right? And this is what I call a leader, right? This is where you have a character mention somebody or something, and then boom, you see that person or that thing in the very next scene. First shot, in fact, most times, right? Now, Coach Scott's story is likely to be a smaller sub-story. I guess you could call it like a B story if you really just, try hard enough to. I tell people that structure is getting more and more convoluted. And as we move forward, and eventually you realize as a screenwriter, like I said again, that you can do whatever you want to. But for the sake of analysis and being on the same page, we'll just call this the episode's B story, right? Now, back in the hut, Natalie dismisses the cult e-board, right? But as they all leave the hut, Taissa stays behind and asks Natalie to do something about the beef between Shauna and Mari. Again, like I said, political mind, right? Natalie explains that Shauna is simply in a mood and that Mari is Mari, that it'll all blow over. Now, Taissa reminds Natalie that the scuffle earlier wasn't the first and that she really thinks Natalie needs to talk to them. Natalie asks, and what? Tell them to start liking each other or else? Maybe I should just make them say one nice thing about the other. Like, they be still coming for Jackie after all this, right? She continues, come on, Ty, it's dumb girl shit. And as you know, we actually have life or death to deal with here. Taissa replies, that's my point, Nat. Maybe out here it's all life or death. Don't forget what happened to Jackie. And this is why I think Taissa would be better to be in charge, right? And, again, like I said, I agree with Taissa's assessment here, right? Given that there's no real penal system out in the wilderness, right? You can't let people disagree to the point of resorting to physical violence because somebody could literally end up dead, right? Though nobody resorted to physical violence in this case, Jackie essentially died over an argument. And Lottie almost died due to the fact that Shauna beat the brakes off of her, right? And everybody stood around and they let her do it, right? So Shauna has been directly responsible for one death by basically sending Jackie outside into the dead of winter to freeze to death. And she was almost responsible for a second because Lottie could have very easily died. Shauna is in fact in a mood, the mood where anybody can get it, right? And she's more than proven she's willing to give anybody that work, right? And that makes her, in my mind, at least the most dangerous member of the group remaining, even more dangerous than Travis. And he's probably he's the strongest person left. But Shauna's rage is I could imagine would be a scary thing for people who got to live out in the wilderness with her, right? You wake up and chick standing over you with a knife, like what the fuck, But back on the other side of the game, Coach continues meandering through the woods, checking leaves and whatnot. When he finally comes across, he's tracking animals is what he's doing. When he finally comes across a hidden bunker, now he manages to uncover it and discover food and supplies inside, right? Now he goes through the items, simply ecstatic about the find, right? And he begins to just open things up and just start eating right away, like with a gleeful smile on his face, right? So this would be the second plot point in the B story, if you will. And it's clear that Coach was starving, right? So the writers here take him to the brink of starvation and then issue him a last-second reprieve here, right? Plain and simple. And, this is also moving Coach Scott towards the inevitable. And we'll get to that later on in this video. So from there, we go back to the present and we see a group of young girls looking at the trophy case at the high school in town, seeing Natalie's picture there. So clearly the school is honoring Natalie in the same way they honored Travis back in season 1 after his death. And they remarked that the surviving members of the Yellowjackets were out in the woods doing cult shit, right? One of the girls remarks that Callie's mom was there, that they killed pigs and ate them raw, then smeared the guts all over themselves and had a totally drugged out orgy, right? Then one of the other girls suggests that they get Kyle drunk, that being Callie's ex-boyfriend, and ask him if Callie's into freaky shit too. Now at that moment, the bell rings and the girls all head to class, but of course we see that Callie was nearby, at her locker, close enough to have heard the conversation, but clearly not close enough for the girls to have seen her standing right there, listening to said conversation. I digress, right? So this scene is the second plot point in Callie's A story, wherein she is made to deal with not only what happened at Lolly's wellness retreat, but now everybody in town knowing and talking about it. So it's something that she's going to be unable to escape, so to speak, right? So from there, still in the present, we see adult Thaisa on the phone arguing with Simone about being able to talk to their son. And it's a one-way conversation, likely because the actor who plays Simone wasn't available, or either production didn't want to pay her to actually appear on camera. So there you go. But when the conversation's over, she hangs up the phone and we see her standing in the room with Van, who's laying in bed sick. Remember, she has cancer. Now, Van asks if everything's all right, and Thaisa says no before explaining to Van that she doesn't look too hot either. And Van replies, yeah, turns out that doing shots in the middle of the day is not a great when you're dying of cancer. Thaisa replies, you're terminal and you're scared of a fatty liver? Thaisa then rummages through a stack of forms on a nightstand near the bed, complaining that Van had not signed any of them yet. Now, Van explains, I signed the DNR. That way, when I flatline, everybody will know they can go to lunch. Now, Thaisa begs Van not to shut her out. She asks her to come and stay in her room, that it's been weeks. She asks why they can't be together, and Van explains, why? Are you fucking kidding me? What did you ditch me for? The veneer of respectability? Your high-powered law degree? The irony or the tragic joke is that you ended up gay anyway, married to a woman you're still fucking married to. So instead of asking me why at the end of my life I'm not leaping at the opportunity to sleep with you, how about you just go fuck yourself? That was a bar. I like it. Thaisa takes a moment to think about what Van just said before asking, can I at least take you to dinner? If you're up for it, I think we can both stand and get out of this house. Van replies, I literally just told you to go F yourself and you're asking me out. Thaisa replies, did I mention it'll be stupidly expensive and that I'm paying? So this scene is the very first one, in my opinion, in Van and Thaisa's A story, that being them finding their way back to each other romantically, right? This scene is also being used to further both the episode's plot and Van and Thaisa's season arc, while also sneakily filling in some gaps between what happened to their relationship since the girls were rescued from the wilderness, right? Kind of sneaky. So next, we find Callie standing outside the school, staring at a map on her phone while she waits for someone. And suddenly my man Randy appears on the scooter. And Callie seems surprised to see him, asking him why he's delivering Swift Eats, right? So I guess like DoorDash, right? So Randy explains that his wife took him back, but that said he had to get a job. Remember, he was staying at the motel the first 2 seasons due to marital issues, right? And Callie asks, and this is what you chose? Randy smartly replies, my application is pending at NASA. Now, Callie asks for the bag. Randy explains that he took a look inside the bag and that Callie's order was really weird. Callie asks again that Randy hurry up and give her the bag. Randy does so, explaining that the bag is heavy, and then she takes it and scurries back inside the school. Now, this scene is just a continuation of Callie's episode arc, right? The third beat in her A story. She's clearly ordered pig guts, right? Because the girls were talking about pig guts, and plans to use them to get back at the girls who were talking about her mother and the other Yellowjackets, right? Somehow. We kind of have an idea of what's about to happen. It's going to be a Carrie moment, right? Somehow. So back at the house, we see Shauna going through her daughter's room, which we've seen her do since the very first episode in season 1. I have no problem with it, right? I feel like as a parent, you have the right to go through all your kids' stuff. You pay the rent, right? So basically, their room is your room, right? But this time she finds weed and she decides to take a little smoke break. Now, her phone rings and it's Callie's principal. Shauna answers the phone asking if everything is okay, and because it's a one-way conversation, we can just assume she's being told whatever it was that Callie did with the pig guts she ordered from Swift Eats, and it seems to even surprise Shauna to hear, right? This scene is kind of still a part of Callie's A story, even though she isn't present in the scene, but it's the next logical step in the story, her mother finding out what she did, facilitating the next story beat, right? Now, back in the wilderness, we see Lottie making mushroom tea for Travis. And he walks around the glen, clearly high as a giraffe's ass, right? And Lottie asks him if he can feel it kicking in yet. Now, Travis explains that he can feel everything and nothing. He goes on to ask, have you ever noticed that everything and nothing are both filled with things? Lottie asks Travis to sit with her, and he clumsily plops himself down on the ground beside her. Lottie laughs and remarks, dude, you're so high. Now, Travis laughs and responds, I am so high. Lottie then explains to him that it's okay to be angry about what happened to Javi and his dad. Travis asks, what about Shauna? And Lottie explains to Travis that grieving isn't about competition, that she's tried to talk to Shauna, but that Shauna just keeps shutting her out. She then tells Travis that needing a shrink doesn't make you a shrink. right? So Travis then asks, "You had a shrink?" Lottie replies, "Shrinks, plural. And the pills they gave me, so I stopped seeing things." Now Travis thinks before asking, "And then you got out here and you started seeing things again." Lottie replies, "Until I didn't." Travis then becomes distressed, asking Lottie if she hears something. He stands up, listening more intently, explaining that it's the trees, that they're screaming. He then touches one of them, and one of the trees, that is, and the noise becomes unbearable. Lottie tries to help, explaining to Travis that what he's hearing isn't real. Girl, the pot calling the kettle. He asks, "You really can't hear that?" Lottie again says, "No." And then Travis then replies cryptically, "You will." Now, this is another side story. I guess we can call it a C story. One that, again, ties directly to the series runner in that it's about, the girls or the group's time in the wilderness. And I feel like this scene is simply escalating the presence of the perceived supernatural element that has been hanging out on the periphery of this story for 2 seasons now, right? So this is the writers again pushing the wilderness storyline closer to an answer of some kind as it pertains to who or what is causing all the paranormal phenomena that the group is experiencing. Keep that in mind, right? And in this scene, they're also kind of retconning, I feel like, Travis and Lottie's relationship, right? Because remember in season 2, Lottie talks about having, gone to visit Travis and spending time with him and then taking him to the barn where he ultimately ended up dead, right? And, this kind of makes that make a little more sense now when you look at the fact that, oh, okay, here they are getting closer in the wilderness. So maybe they had a closer relationship than we thought initially, right? So from there, we find the coach back at the bunker, covering it all back up, right? Now, he's also managed to get all of the food out of the bunker all by himself, which I find rather impressive considering his handicap, right? He's a one-legged man, right? Now, he leaves some food scraps on top of the tarp that he used to cover the bunker in an effort to attract and catch a deer. And then, he uses a rope to drag the footlockers full of food back to his man cave where he's been hiding, right? And if you've gotten this far, then you know what I'm going to say here, right? This is just the next beat in Coach's little adventure outside the cave, right? It's the next thing that happens, nothing more, nothing less. Now, we go back to the present and we see Jeff and Shauna in their kitchen talking about what Callie did at school. And Jeff seems surprised that Callie was suspended for assaulting girls with guts, right? Now, Shauna thinks assault is too strong a word, explaining it's not like she had a gun and a mask, right? Now, Jeff explains that the girl's parents are calling it assault as Shauna takes a bag of chips out of the pantry. Jeff then asks Shauna if she's sure that the guts weren't human. Shauna replies, "You can't just DoorDash human entrails, right?" I think Shauna thinks Jeff is stupid, right? She kind of looks at him like, "Oh, you poor idiot," right? All the time. But Jeff asks Shauna if she's talked to Callie or if she knows where she is. Shauna explains that Callie went to get a boba, right? Man, let me tell you something, dog. If I got suspended for doing what she did, dog, I'm coming straight home. My mama ain't letting me go get no boba. But then again, I was raised in the 80s and 90s. So, it's 2025, right? Parents and kids are friends. So Jeff wonders why Callie would do such a thing. Shauna explains that Callie talked about going vegan, that maybe it's a statement or Gen Z TikTok bullshit, right? Shauna then opens the bag of chips and begins to eat. And Jeff asks, "You're hungry?" I guess he means considering that they're talking about guts, right? Shauna explains that she's just not going to freak out, that it'll only make things worse. Plus, I think Shauna got a strong stomach. They probably, when you think about the stuff that they ate, I wonder if Jeff really knows the extent of what the hell went down out there, right? But I digress, right? Jeff replies, "Then what, Shauna? Because 6 weeks ago, our daughter saw our friends wearing animal masks chasing you through the woods with knives. She shot one of them, who's in the loony bin now. And then she watched Natalie die. And then we told her that I'm a blackmailer and that you're a murderer. That's not a typical childhood. And, I think it's really possible that our daughter's not okay." Jeff then gets up and closes the cabinets before noticing a smell. He then turns to Shauna and asks if she smoked some chronic. She says no, before explaining that nobody calls it chronic anymore, that he has to stop. Jeff replies simply, "Noted," right? And this is all similar to the last scene that Shauna was in that it could be categorized as filler, but it's going to be used to facilitate what comes next in Callie's A story, right? So next we find Taisha and Van at the really expensive restaurant, dressed nicely, and their waiter, a guy, brings them a cotton candy appetizer, explaining that the chef recommends just one bite before walking away, right? Now Van asks, so this is the hot ticket, huh? Taisha explains that she had to call a guy that had to call a guy to get them in there. The ladies then eat the cotton candy before Van remarks, I'm sorry, but don't you want to take a flamethrower to this place? Why do people come here? Don't they see how stupid it is, that it's a waste of their fucking life? Taisha thinks before replying, fuck it, do you want to just go get a pizza and a quart of fudge ripple? We can eat it on the roof. Van looks at Taisha for a moment and then asks, really? Taisha replies, yeah. And Van replies, deal. Now, Van tries to signal the waiter for the check, but Taisha stops her, asking, you remember the night of Amber Notting's party? We went to that diner off Route 9? Van laughs before asking, are you serious? Taisha replies, completely. Van reminds Taisha that she's a senator, and Taisha reminds Van that she was a senator and that she's now disgraced, and that in New Jersey that means you can do anything. She tells Van that she'll go first and that she can meet her out back. She then gets up and loudly explains that she needs to go to the ladies' room. Van then tells her aloud to be quick, that every minute away from her is a torture, before Taisha exits the restaurant, leaving Van chuckling at the table alone. Now, after a few moments, Van gets up and follows her, exiting through the back of the restaurant, where Taisha is waiting for her in an alley. The pair begin to walk swiftly towards the street before the waiter appears, calling out to the women. Now, they begin to run as the waiter pursues them. And my man is a track star, because I don't know how much that restaurant cost, but the bill must have been super high because Buddy chased them for like blocks, right? He chases the pair through the streets until he almost gets hit by a bus. And in that moment, he begins to struggle to breathe as a Samaritan tries to offer help, right? He falls out and the Samaritan is trying to, CPR and the whole nine, right? Now, keep that in mind, right? Meanwhile, Van and Taisha finally stop running, and they stand in another alley catching their breath before sharing a kiss. Now, as they kiss, Taisha sees a mysterious, tall, slender figure standing there, watching them, and stops. Van asks, what? Taisha responds, nothing. And the pair begins to kiss more passionately, right? Now, this is simply put the final beat in Van and Taisha's A story, right? This is the writer showing us the evolving nature of Van and Taisha's rekindled relationship, right? Van is finally giving in to her feelings in sort of a carpe diem kind of way, despite the fact that she still feels hurt that Taisha set her aside after they got rescued, because she was more concerned about what being gay might mean for her future, and the future that she had in mind, at least. When they were in the wilderness, I think Taisha could do what she wanted with less fear of judgment, because it was just a group out there, and you could, make the argument that any day could be your last, especially with Shauna hanging around, right? In a way that's more matter of fact than it might seem now that they're back in civilized society, right? That is to say that in the wilderness, one would likely live for today, whereas in the civilized world, you might opt to live for tomorrow, right? So mission accomplished, right? Now, next, we go back to the past, and the group is dressed in their ceremonial garb as they sit around the large table, ready to enjoy the meal that the losing team has prepared. Shauna as head chef, right? As the losing team serves the winning team, Mari smartly jokes, the service here is slow. And the other girls on the winning team begin to laugh. Now, Natalie announces, for your solstice dining pleasure or whatever, we have deer soup. Taisha then continues, also known as braised venison stew, served with our finest vintage of berry wine. Shauna stands next to Mari, holding her food, as Mari stares up at her triumphantly until Shauna spits in the bowl right in front of her before remarking, bon appetit, right? Mari looks into the bowl, disgusted, as Shauna asks, what, aren't you hungry? Now, as Mari contemplates her response, Shauna continues, go ahead. Just give me a reason, right? Shauna wants to put hands on Shawty, right? Put hands upon her. Now, Mari replies, what the fuck? Shauna just spit in my food. Now, the girls all seem exhausted by Shauna's behavior at this point, right? They're like completely over it, right? As Mari asks Natalie, are you going to do something about this or what? Natalie asks Shauna if she spit in Mari's soup, and Shauna replies, "What? No. And the fact that you think I would is insulting." Right? Now, I mean, and they know Shauna did it, right? Everything that Shauna's been doing to this point, right? I mean, there ain't even really no need to ask Shauna if she did this, right? You know she did it, right? So Mari stands up, right? Holding the bowl as she stares Shauna down. And Shauna stares right back at her, right? And remarks, "You should eat. I worked hard to make it." Mari then, in retaliation, pours the soup onto the ground before replying, "I should fucking kick your ass." Right? Now, Mari, you already got your ass kicked once, right? I mean, I don't know. But at that point, Shauna grabs Mari by the hair and forces her to the ground. For the second time this episode, I might add, right? This time forcing her head into the soup that she wasted as she insists, "I told you to eat, bitch." The rest of the girls have to pull Shauna off of Mari, and Natalie declares, "That's it. I fucking had it with this shit. If everybody wants me to be the camp counselor, then fine. Starting tomorrow, you're both on house arrest. Stay in your shelters. I don't want to see your faces for a week. Okay? Got it?" Now Mari replies, "What? This is bullshit. She attacked me." Natalie replies, "Keep going, Mari. I'll make it 2 weeks." Mari takes off her robe and retorts, "You know what? Fuck this. Screw all of you. I'm out of here," before storming off. And at that point, Shauna retreats to her shelter as well, and Natalie just tells the group to just let her go. Now, this is the escalation of Shauna's violent tendencies truly coming to fruition, right? The climax of the episode, so to speak. And this was necessary for what comes next, but there's part of me that kind of goes, this was kind of silly, right? But back in the present, we see Misty enter the bar wearing Natalie's jacket. Now, mind you, she's wearing a sweatshirt with a cat on under it, right? She approaches the bar and the bartender asks, "Can I get you something?" Now, Misty smartly responds, "Well, I'm not here to do my taxes. I need a drink." The bartender asks what kind, and she asks for an espresso margarita before she stops herself and changes her mind, ordering a whiskey, straight up. The bartender then gives her the drink and she just pounds it, right? Now, one of the guys that was shooting pool when she walked in walks over to the bar to get more beers, and he notices Misty's jacket, stating, "Nice jacket." He's kind of trying to be like a smart aleck, right? Misty then orders another whiskey, which she pounds and before she asks for another one. Now, Misty then goes through the process of getting pissy drunk. I think she drinks 7 shots right before the bartender finally cuts her off. And at that moment, she sees the face in a nearby mirror and hears the voice of young Natalie, right, for some reason, telling her that she shouldn't take shit from dirtbags, right, that she doesn't have to take shit from anyone. She then looks over at the gentleman who came into the bar moments before, and he's laughing as he and his friend drink their beers and continue to shoot pool. So then she gets up and goes over to them asking if they have a problem with her jacket. Now, the man who commented on her jacket just stands there while the other man goes, "Hey, we're in the middle of a game." Misty replies, "Oh, well, life's a game and we're all in the middle of it," as she begins throwing the balls into the pockets. The man then explains that he didn't mean anything by his earlier comment, that he was simply thought that her jacket was cool. Misty explains, "I don't have to take your shit, I know I don't look like someone you need to be worried about, but I'm trouble. I've lit dicks on fire," right? At that point, the men begin to laugh again. So Misty douses the nearest man's jeans with beer from a nearby bottle and grabs a candle. But she notices that it isn't lit, and she asks, "Who's got a lighter?" The other man approaches her, but Misty warns him not to touch the jacket before ultimately passing out. Now, this is the next beat in Misty's A story, right? And this feels like, just another part of the grieving process for Misty, right? She's trying to channel Natalie as a way of keeping her memory alive, right? As a way of keeping Natalie's spirit with her. You know what I mean? Now, back at the Sadecki house, we find Shauna homeschooling Callie as she asks about the Teapot Dome scandal, right? History, right? So Callie remarks, "This is insane. We're not doing this anymore." Shauna responds, "Okay, if you ever want to use the car again, you will stay where you are. You don't like homeschooling? Don't get suspended next time." She then goes back to the Teapot Dome scandal. Callie replies, "Fuck it, I don't know." Shauna then replies, "No swearing in my class." Callie explains that a teapot fell from the dome of the Capitol when some workers were having tea up there, and it almost killed the president. Shauna then asks which president, and Callie replies, "I don't know, Trump." Yeah, I don't know about it. Okay, fine. Shauna replies, I'm afraid the answer is Warren Harding. And Callie replies, that's not the answer. I don't get what's going on there, but okay. Now, Shauna takes a sip of wine before Callie asks, where's Dad? Shauna explains that he's at the gym. Callie asks, he's mad, huh? Shauna explains that he is, but that he's mostly concerned and confused, that they both are. She goes on to ask, can you talk to me? All that stuff you saw at Lottie's, Nat dying? She asks Callie if she's having dark thoughts. Callie explains that she didn't do the guts thing because she's damaged or psycho. She did it because Chloe and her friends were talking shit behind her back. Shauna asks what they were saying, and Callie explains they said that Natalie OD'd and that when you were doing all weird sex stuff, and I just wanted to teach them a lesson. Shauna then exhales in relief, asking, that's all it was? And Callie answers, yes. Callie then asks her mom if she wants to see it. Shauna asks if she has it on video. Callie explains that she does, and so she shows it to her. And in the video, we see Callie get up from her seat at lunch in the cafeteria and walk over to Chloe's table. Chloe asks jokingly if she's brown bagging it, and Callie smartly replies, my mom packed my lunch today, before dumping the contents on the bag onto their table. And a little onto their clothes, right? Shauna finds the video hilarious and asks Callie to play it again. So this is technically the end of Callie's A story, right? We get a chance to see what Callie did to deal with her trauma as she plays the video for her mom. And this is the tension that has existed between the pair since the beginning of the episode kind of being relieved. Mission accomplished, right? Now, meanwhile, we find Misty walking home alone as my man Walter pulls up beside her in his car. And, Misty, having no idea that it's him at first, explains, I know I don't look dangerous, but don't fuck with me. Walter replies, Misty, it's me. Now, Misty explains to Walter that she doesn't need his assistance. Walter insists on taking Misty home. He asks Misty why she's pushing him away, that he doesn't understand. She explains that, of course he doesn't understand. The only ones who do understand are her friends. She tells Walter that she'll call Shauna and that she'll come get her. This felt forced, right? But okay. Walter explains that they're not coming. Misty inquires how he knows that. Walter explains to Misty that she left her phone at the bar, that's how he found her, and that apparently the bartender was a good Samaritan, and that instead of calling the cops for what sounded like a felony assault, he called her saved contacts that no one answered until it got to him. At that point, Misty begins to cry profusely, claiming that she misses Natalie so much and that it's their fault that she's dead. Walter then gets out of the car and hugs Misty, trying desperately to console her. Now, this scene ends Misty's episode arc in the present, right? The end of her A story. Simply put, she needed to find her own way to deal with her grief over Natalie's death and her part in it, right? And I mean, even though, sure, she's got some healing to do, certainly, but as it pertains to what needed to happen in the episode, mission accomplished, right? Now, back at the Sadecki house, we find Callie making an ice cream sundae as someone watches from the outside the kitchen window. She becomes worried when she hears a noise at the front door and goes to see what it is. She finds an envelope addressed to Shauna Shipman. Notice, Shauna Shipman, with the little hieroglyphic symbol on it, and decides to open it to find the tape inside, which she stuffs inside the pocket of her hoodie. Now, at that point, she's startled by her dad, who also seems surprised to find her up and about. He explains that she's on suspension, not vacation, and she needs to go to bed before exiting the kitchen. I mean, Callie's in high school. I don't know why, go to bed is what you would be saying to like a 16-year-old or whatever, but all right. Now, even though this scene involves Callie, her episode arc, has already kind of been completed. This scene, in my opinion, just simply exists to facilitate something that is coming later in the season. It's, kind of links this episode to maybe a later one. And I'll get into that in the theory section of this video, right? So from there, we go back to the past and we see the group in their robes approach 3 graves that we saw at the beginning of the episode. And Lottie explains, on this, the shortest night of the year, we gather to honor 3 souls that have slipped into the darkness that lasts forever. We celebrate their sacrifice, we grieve their loss, and rejoice at the knowledge that they're still here with us, right? As the group lights homemade paper lanterns, right? And let them float into the sky, Lottie continues, we know that they are here because we can still hear them, right? Because we can still feel them, because they haven't gone. They've just returned to a place that waits for all of us. We call to Javi, now with the wilderness, watch over us. The group then replies in unison, watch over us. Lottie continues, we call to Jackie, now with the wilderness, guide us. The group replies in unison, guide us. And then Lottie continues, we call to the child, now with the wilderness, deliver us. And at that point, Shauna walks away as the rest of the group replies in unison, deliver us, right? At that point, faint screams can be heard by Akilah first, right? Keep that in mind, that they're heard by Akilah first, who asks Misty if she can hear it. The screams become louder, and the wind begins to blow as all of the girls eventually become frightened. Lottie, confused, then looks to Travis, who appears unmoved, and he stares back at her, and she asks, Travis, is that what you heard? Now, this scene, again, is the escalation of the paranormal element in this story, right? And will lead us into the next group of scenes that involve the girls in the wilderness moving forward, right? Now, finally, we see Coach the next day. So, think about this. We didn't see what happened after that, right? It just immediately skips to the next day, right? So who knows what the hell happened later that night, right? So we see Coach Scott the next day return to the pit to discover that he has in fact caught something, right? Mari. Cut to black. This is the end of Coach's woodland episode adventure, right? And his whole side story ends with him not catching a deer, but catching a yellow jacket instead. Now, I know a lot of you guys weren't too happy about the writers skipping over what happened in the wilderness after the cabin burned down, but I really don't have a problem with the writers skipping to summer here. Because, they literally skip past spring straight to summer. It's a change in tone from where we left off, which, visually makes some sense. And it's an overall positive for the ebbs and flows of the telling of the tale, right? From a logistical standpoint, I also understand the decision, right? And furthermore, it's what I expected to happen. Because I want you guys to keep in mind that this had to be done from a pacing standpoint, right? Remember, the girls and guys were out there in the wilderness, from what we understand, for 19 months. That's almost 2 years. And we're only about halfway through their survival story, right? Because if you remember in the cold open of the series, Pit Girl was running through the forest and there was snow all over the place, right? When she fell into the pit, into the punji trap, right? And seeing as how this hasn't happened yet, that they've just gotten out of winter and we haven't seen this take place yet, that means it won't happen until next winter. So as you can see, we've got a long way to go before this part of the story is done. And that's why I was fine with this writing choice overall, right? I like the decision to put Van and Taissa back together, especially in the aftermath of Taissa separating with Simone, right? The writers did this so they can make room for Van, right? I think that Van and Taissa being together is much more impactful for the story, dramatically speaking, especially when you consider that Van is terminally ill, right? That's going to make it so much more heart-wrenching when she passes. I think if Van had gone back to where she lived and Taissa went back to where she lived and then Van just turns up dead, then you kind of go, oh, shucks. But to watch her and Taissa together and then have Van die, which is sure to happen, that's going to be, the greatest dramatic impact. That's going to have the greatest dramatic impact, right? Now, I like the fact that we're headed towards some answers finally as it pertains to the supernatural element of the story, right? The writers have been doing this thing where they've been hedging. Like there may be something happening in the woods or there may not be, right? And it's cute, right? You can get away with that for a little while, but they've just been at it for far too long, right? If you remember, Lottie was hearing and seeing shit in season 1, but then we knew she had mental issues since she was a kid and that she had to be on medication and that when they got stuck in the wilderness, her medication would have eventually run out. So it could be that, when we saw her in the seance, like screaming and headbutting the glass and stuff like that, it could be that what she was hearing and seeing was all in her head, right? And then I want you all to remember as well, something lit Laura Lee's teddy bear on fire in her airplane. And that felt very spooky, right? Then we get the sense that through some POV camera work, that there's something going on in the woods, right? Van's life was mysteriously saved after she was attacked by wolves and thought to be dead, right? Right before they burned her body, she woke the hell up, right? With her face torn to shreds, right? Jackie's body was saved by the snow falling on it so the group wouldn't starve, right? And now you have Travis getting high and hearing voices. So I don't know. I'm ready for the writers to go ahead and get to it, right? And I think that maybe they do here, right? Because we see, or better yet, Taissa sees Slender Man in the alley after they dine and ditch the restaurant, right? And it feels like he might at least be a representative of the entity, right? Now, in season 1, Natalie says, and you guys remember, I saw it, I felt it, we brought it back. We brought it back with us, right? Now, she says this to Travis after she overdoses and is revived by paramedics, right? And adult Lottie also says in season 2, I thought we left it there when we were rescued, but now I realize we brought it back with us. She says this in reference to the darkness and the violence that the group experienced while they were in the wilderness, right? And so I think what we're about to see is exactly what the hell happened that got them from where they were to like full. I mean, they're already kind of a pseudo cult, right? But they about to get full blown cult status. The Antler Queen and all kind of. We've seen some flash forwards that make you go, what the hell, is that about, right? And I think we're finally seeing I think with Slender Man, we're finally seeing what they've been seeing since season 1. And that means we're finally getting to the hook of the show, right? That being the very thing that you watch a show or a movie or even read a book for, right? The hook. And this is, like I said, it's exactly what I've been waiting for, right? Now, I think Mari leaving the group was a bit dramatic on the part of the writers, right? And her getting trapped in the pit, while potentially poetic, could end up being a waste of space on the page, depending on how we move forward. I'll get to why in just a bit here. So I'm split on that for right now, right? Oh, and this is the pit, right? The pit. This is 100% the pit we saw in the cold open, the punji trap, right? The pit that Coach Scott found is the pit that's going to be turned into the punji trap. And I'll get to what I think that means in a second. Just stay with me, right? Now, I'm undecided about Travis being able to hear the wilderness all of a sudden, right? I'll have to get back to you guys as the season continues to move forward and we get more information for me to kind of say exactly how I feel about all that as more details kind of get filled in the gaps, because that's where some of this stuff is going to be what gets filled in the gaps is going to make this thing either make a lot of sense or make me be like, okay, that's stupid, right? And despite the fact that I almost never like this in shows, the fact that people, kill folks and murder people and don't go to jail and aren't brought to justice, mostly because I think it borders on the side of the ridiculous. It makes law enforcement feel like completely just stupid and incompetent, right? And especially in season 2, the way that law enforcement got dealt with, I was just like, okay, so these guys are like, Barney Fife type cops, right? Dewey from like Scream, right? But at least Dewey kind of took his job. But, Dewey's kind of like slapstick, kind of funny, right? I think I'm actually good in this case with none of the women going to jail and Jeff not going to jail, at least for the moment, right? Despite all the mayhem in season 2, especially in season 1. And I'm cautiously looking forward to seeing how the present timeline works out. Even though, at least for the remainder of this season, check back with me, though, and say like the halfway point, because Showtime writers have a tendency to really, really, really piss me off, right? Now, overall, I'd give this episode a 65% or a 6.5 if you're thinking IMDb score, right? Now, with that being said, the first thing here that I would have changed given the episode is I would have made Shauna even less a part of the group in that opening scene, right? I think that if she truly is diametrically opposed of the way that the girls are behaving, the writers might as well have gone ahead and taken that idea all the way, right? Because why would she play capture the bone with the girls 1 minute and then completely wanting to be left alone the very next minute, right? I think the writers had Shauna playing capture the bone simply so they could highlight the beef between her and Mari, a beef that we still know very little about at this point, right? I guess something happened in the spring where Shauna was just over her shit, right? But I think there was plenty of time to do that in the scenes that followed, right? They could have kept the brief confrontation between the two after the capture the bone game was held, right, back at the village. And then they could have still had the girls fight at dinner, and I think it would have facilitated the exact same outcome, which was Mari ultimately getting pissed off and leaving the group, striking out on her own in the middle of the night, right? I mean, that was just her letting her emotions make her do something dumb. That's just crazy. And I get it. The girls might be getting used to being out there in the woods, but walking off on your own in the middle of the night, that's not the move, right? You just have to go to your hut and be mad. And I think, it would have more than solidified Shauna's disdain for the company she was in and how they were behaving, right? I also would have had Misty see and hear the voice of adult Natalie at the bar instead of young Natalie. It just didn't make narrative sense, right? She didn't kill Natalie when she was young. She killed her when she was old. So the fact that that's the Natalie she should be hearing, that should be sticking with her at this point, right? Now I know what you guys are going to say about that, right? You're going to remind me that Juliette Lewis is no longer in the show, and you would be 100% right. I get that. But that also solidified my point, because I think the only reason we saw a young Natalie in the mirror instead of old Natalie in this scene is because Juliette Lewis is no longer available as far as the show is concerned, right? Which makes me think that she asked to be written off the show, potentially, and that it wasn't that the writers had planned to kill her off in the season 2 finale, right? But if I had my way, if I was the one writing this, say, for example, and I could make anything happen that I wanted to, I've got complete carte blanche, right? I'm the puppet master, right? It would have been older Natalie that she would have seen and heard instead of young Natalie. I'm just saying, right? Now, I have some theories about what I think will happen, moving forward here, right? I think the Capture the Bone game is the evolution of the process of the group getting to the place where they formalize a ceremony wherein they choose their prey, hunt them down, kill them, and eat them, right? Remember how the game went in season 2 in the past timeline, right? When they needed to feed Lottie so she could heal. They drew cards until someone got the Queen of Hearts. That person then became the prey. But then in season 2 finale, in the present timeline, when Shauna drew the Queen of Hearts, Lottie explained that she could submit or run. And I think that's what we see happen in the cold opening of the show back in the pilot episode, right? And speaking of the pilot, I think Mari is 100% Pit Girl, right? And though I could be wrong about that, about exactly how she becomes Pit Girl, if you're asking me today, I think she makes her way back to the group somehow, to Shauna's dismay. And then next winter, again, not anytime soon, but next winter, meaning we still got a way to go before the girls get rescued. Remember, they were out there for almost 2 years, so it can be assumed that they spent 2 winters in the wilderness, right? Meaning that their survival experiment, again, is only halfway over at this point. With no game available due to the cold, she draws the dreaded Queen of Hearts card, chooses to run instead of submit, and falls into the punji trap. Book it. That's 100% happening. And how poetic would it be for her to get stuck in the trap in this episode, only to be killed by it next time, right? That absolutely sounds like a writer's move to me. I mean, hell, it's something that I would do. I would absolutely do something like that, right? And that's the only reason I didn't absolutely hate Mari getting stuck in the pit this episode, because I just have the feeling that they're setting it up for her to get killed by said trap later on, right? Now, and that may or may not be this season. I can't imagine us getting from summer all the way back to winter before the season's over with. But again, I could be wrong, because pacing is all over the place with this show. I also think, unfortunately, that means that Coach Scott is going to be getting up out of here, headed to that upper room. Because in order for the girls to turn that pit into a punji trap, it would mean that Coach is dead by that point, right? Because I don't believe he did that, right? I think the girls did. Most of the girls want his head because they think he burned down the cabin. But hot take, I don't think he did. I think the entity burned the cabin down, right? Just like I think the entity burned down the plane that Laura Lee tried to fly out of the wilderness back in season 1, right? Plus, how amazing would it be for the plot if the girls found where Coach was hiding and killed him, only to figure out that he didn't burn the cabin down after all, right? The fact that they're talking about him burning down the cabin so much in this episode leads me to believe that he probably didn't do it, right? There's way too much talk about that, right? How would they figure out that he didn't burn the cabin down, you might ask? Maybe something else gets set on fire. Maybe even something later on in the next winter, after he's dead already, and they realize that the entity does what it needs to do to get the desired result from the group, right? And speaking of the entity, I think its magic works differently on each individual person, right? Maybe even according to their relationship with the wilderness, right? Van's life was mysteriously saved, again, when she was attacked by wolves and the other girls tried to burn her. And so I wonder if that means, the way that the magic impacts Van is that she can't die, right? Keep that in mind. Think about that, right? Van was supposed to be dead when the wolves killed her, And in fact, it looked like the wolves did kill her. And then when they went to burn her body, she was resurrected, right? So now that she has cancer and she's terminal, and she even brought up, when I flatline, everybody can go to lunch. So I wonder if she'll die of cancer and be resurrected, right? So just stick a pin in that and let's see about that, right? Now, Thaisa develops a split personality, right? So I wonder if that's how the entity impacts her, right? Where she's out here climbing trees and doing shit, digging in the dirt and eating dirt and shit, and she don't even remember it, right? So I wonder if that's how the entity impacts her, right? Travis hears whispering trees like the others, on Lost. Remember the whispers? And it's even said that Aquila has a relationship with the wilderness, and that's evident due to her relationships with the animals. Like maybe she can talk to the animals and communicate with the animals, right? Because remember the dead mouse from last season, right? When Thaisa came up to her, the mouse was dead, but she was talking to the mouse and it was climbing around on her hand and everything before that, right? And maybe the entity brings out Shauna's fury, right? Maybe it just makes her really, 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 really mad. I understand that she has lots of reason to be upset, but she's about it. She's really, really about it. And that might not be all her, right? I think that by the time the girls get rescued, they're all going to be their own brand of batshit crazy, right? Straight up G shit. I think we might also get to meet the entity by season's end. In fact, it feels like a season finale kind of revelation, right? The fact that Slender Man is starting to show up visually on screen is a good sign, right? Because I don't think we saw him before. I might be mistaken, but I don't think we saw Slender Man before, right? I think, maybe Thaisa had been seeing Slender Man before, but I don't think they actually showed him to us. I think the survivors have always been seeing him in the present timeline, and I think he's been making the survivors do things out of their character the whole time, right? But the writers are just now showing him to us. Again, I might be wrong about that. You guys can correct me in the comments if I am, but I don't remember seeing Slender Man in season 1 or 2. But yeah, so there's that. I've also been wondering, since we found out that Van had cancer last season, how long the writers would have her be a part of the story exactly. And it feels like, from what we saw this episode, that Van is not long for this world, again, unless she's going to be resurrected somehow, right? And given that we're already at DNRs in the first episode of the season, it feels like Van's death will come before, at least by the season finale. Again, that is, if she stays dead. That could really, lean into the supernatural thing really, really heavily. So that'll be something interesting to watch, right? I also think that we're going to find out that there are even more survivors than the ones we've met already in the present timeline, right? The show has been good for introducing, at this point, additional survivors as seasons move on, right? I actually think that most of the people left will make it out of the woods, right? Why do I think that? Because Shauna is being followed in this episode, right? Shauna sees someone at the bar, and then there's someone standing outside her house watching her kid, right? And they leave the envelope with the tape in it, right? That person was watching Callie, again, like I said, from outside the house at the end of the episode, right? The person who's watching her, that's a Yellowjacket, 100%. And you know who I think it is? Adult Melissa, right? And I think, played by Hilary Swank. Book it. I'm telling you. There's a reason why her character has been elevated to talking status this season, and that's because the writers are preparing us for Melissa's character to have a major impact on the story moving forward, right? And speaking of Melissa, I have a general wondering about something. Melissa drops off a tape, right? A tape that Callie intercepts and keeps for herself, right? Which reminds me that Shauna kept the diary that she wrote in when they were in the wilderness, right? The same diary she scribbled it in at the beginning of this episode. She still has it, right? When you consider just how hard everyone has been working to keep what they went through out there a secret, my question is, why keep the diary, right? Why not burn the hell out that thing, right? Because if that diary ever falls into the wrong hands, you're going to have an issue or a problem, right? And I want to say that in season 1, those diaries came up missing for a second. So you got to wonder if somebody, I don't know, maybe Jeff got a hold to him, but I don't know that Jeff really has a full understanding of what went on out there, right? I think if Jeff had been the one to get a hold of the diaries, they'd have talked in depth about what the hell happened out there by now. But, I digress, right? I guess the answer will be revealed in real time, and I think it's directly related to the tape that gets dropped off here. And last but not least, my theory is this. I think we're headed for a faction split, right? If you notice, Shauna starts off this episode ostracized from the group, right? But you also notice that Melissa starts to kind of follow Shauna's lead a little bit. And you know, the stepping on the crown, the whole, oh, do you have a personality? It feels like Melissa's gonna kind of float over to Shauna's side here, and eventually what's gonna happen is the surviving group is gonna be split, right? And it's gonna be war in the woods, is what I'm predicting, right? And I think we might even get there before the season's out. That's just me. Now, I think this show is finally starting to get to the good part in the past timeline, right? The part we've all been watching the show to see. I can also admit that the present timeline is starting to pick up a bit, even though I still contend that I care much less about the present than I do the past here. I think it's a shame that the writers decided to take the scenic route to get here, because I felt like we could have got here in season 2. And, you know, that by way of answering the questions that we all, the audience, really care about, which I think has resulted in a lot of filler, right? Again, I've heard this show has 5 seasons, and I think that's 1 season too many. And that's why I think the pacing of this show is just nuts, because I think that just the plan for the show is a season too long. But what do you guys think? Have you seen the first episode in season 3 of Yellowjackets yet? If you have, what did you think about how the season started? Let me know in the comments. And for those of you that might be new to the channel, be sure to like and share this video. If you really like the content, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I drop a new video. You can also now support the channel by leaving a super thanks. If you should be so inclined, I'd really appreciate it. Also, be sure to go and check out themaskscreenwriter.com for more television and film reviews and info on my upcoming film projects. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I got screenplays to write. And I'll catch y'all in the next video.